Disclaimer that there is a mention of suicide in this episode. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Speak Up Erika podcast. I'm back again with part 2 of Art as a Healer with Kendra and Rosemary. Hi again.
Hey.
Going back to how people reacted when you wrote about sexuality, and you're saying that, how did you even come up with this, or how did you write about this kind of thing? Has there been a time where you released your work, and for both you and Kendra, and you've gotten maybe a negative feedback from it, or felt that you had to censor your work, or has that ever happened to the both of you?
Kendra, did you want to go first?
I don't know if I've ever been censored per se, but maybe even I've censored myself in things that I didn't really want to share with certain people. You always think of like when my mom is going to read this, or like, you know, my best friend or my partner, it always will come from a different perspective. So you always have to kind of like censor who you want to read your work. But I've luckily never had anything where I felt the need to really censor myself in terms of my art. But I definitely can see why either you think that it might rub someone the wrong way, or it might be triggering for someone, definitely. But I've been lucky to not be censored by anyone else, explicitly at least.
Something that kind of reminds me about like censoring artwork is like Free the Nipple. Because I know like they're creating art, and it's an awesome campaign, and like the messaging behind it, but other people just have different opinions of what they think is acceptable and not.
How did you feel with your work, Erika? Because your work, unlike my core work, you know, my core work has been fiction, right?
Yeah.
So in fiction, you can disguise things quite well, or come up with completely different scenarios, which I have, and just, you know, used the emotions from my real life ones. But how about you? Because you weren't writing fiction, you were writing about real life experiences that were difficult. So
yeah, some of the stories I did ask for permission if it was okay, and then other stories, when you're sharing personal life stories, and there's also going to be people that are part of your life that you're sharing about in those stories too, you kind of want to protect those people at the same time, even though some of the people didn't do such great things in those stories. But so I guess in a way, as you were saying, Kendra, like I would kind of censor it in a way, but then find a way how to do it creatively, and what is appropriate, I guess, like what can and what can't I include, since it was nonfiction. So it was very tricky to kind of play around with that, but also you want to stay true to your story, and like have your story be told, or, you know, have it kind of out there, and also have other people relate to it. So I never thought about that till you asked me just now, Rosemary. So it's very tricky. Definitely.
It is really tricky. Yeah. And I think that because fiction for me is so great, is that you can, when people have hurt you, you know, whether that has been unintentionally or intentionally, sometimes you can't always work through forgiveness and all of the things you need to work through with the person. In many cases, the person has died, or maybe the person has moved on, and you know, they're in a new relationship, and they're rebuilding their life, and they're at a place where they've come to some kind of evolution, And the last thing that you want to do is haul everyone back into the dysfunction and the toxic stuff that was hurtful. Mm-hmm. Or maybe if it's yourself, that you hurt yourself in the past, you don't necessarily want to go back to that former version of yourself and really look at all the dysfunctional things that you did to hurt yourself. That's not going to have any benefit whatsoever. I mean, well, maybe it would, because you're going to, you need to work through that kind of thing, maybe in therapy. But the great thing about fiction is that you can say, in a way, you can talk to that person that you're trying to work something out with through your characters in a different context. And you can work all of that out, and you can sort it out in a place where no one really gets hurt, or nobody gets dragged back into the very thing that you've worked so hard to get out of. And in terms of censorship, if you look at all the things that art does to heal, whether, you know, it's catharsis or unburdening or connecting you with other people, all of those things, for me, the censorship of it, and whether if people sabotage it, or I've seen it many times over when people are bullied, basically the people who are sabotaging or bullying or making fun of or whatever are cauterizing a key flow of healing in general for the artist and for the audience. And I am not very sympathetic to censorship in that way, or bullying. And a great example of this happened to me when I was quite young. I wasn't thinking about this, it's just your question. So before I wrote, I say I was quite a musical person. So I would spend hours at the piano, and I used to write music, and or at least create music and lyrics. And I led several choirs. I led a children's choir, then I led an adults choir, and I also, you know, created or composed music for musical theater for the town where we lived. And this was my outlet, and I loved it. And I will go as far as to say, for my age, you know, if you're thinking 13, 14, 15, 16, I was very good for my age. I mean, now I'm not all that good at it. But in grade 9 music, we were given a task where we had to write a song. And I was so excited about this, because this was what I did. I did this out of school, and I loved it. And we all sat down to perform our pieces as you would in a grade 9 high school class, and I did mine. And I was so proud of it. I thought the teacher really liked it, and the bullying that I got for this piece of music was horrendous. So, you know, oh, you couldn't have possibly written that, you stole it, I've heard it on the radio before, you know, you're dishonest. And so what was my reaction to do? I didn't want to put up with the hassle. I never took music again in high school. I dropped out of the band. I was in the band in grade 9, so I played the flute for the band, but because I just simply didn't want to deal with it. And I kept my musical life out of school. And that's just a real shame, because it meant that in my school life, I just never experienced something that I really loved, just because I didn't want to put up with the torment that I'd experienced around that one event, because it really was devastating. Because when I created this, I'd created it from the heart. And if you think, how old are you in grade 9? I think you're about 14 maybe. So that's an instance where I just shut down. And you see that all the time. You know, I've definitely seen it in my children too, you know, where people are creative, but then the price, very unfair price for shining like a bright light in whatever in whatever field is just, it's just too much stress to take. And so the art is closed down. So this is the censorship piece for me personally. I've definitely censored myself. That has been a huge hurdle for me with my writing, because my upbringing was very traditional. My father is still a minister, or a vicar, as we would say in the UK. Very morally upright, and these are not my terms, because I am very fluid in my thinking. And if you read my writing, you'll know that I'm very fluid in my thinking. And then, of course, being married and having children, and when the children were teenagers, I didn't want to do anything or write anything that would come back and they would be bullied for or made fun of. And I didn't want to upset people. I didn't want people to feel insecure about me, and I completely censored myself. And so it's been a lot of personal work to break down all of those barriers, and all of the voices, that I've inherited about what's okay and what's not okay to write the way I do. And I'm now at the point where, in terms of my family, or in terms of the people around me, I will not bend. I will not bend. In other words, I'm going to write. I'm going to take the story where it needs to go. I'm going to write. I will never share anybody's personal stories in my writing. I can't promise that I will stay clear of the emotions that other people's stories have generated in me, but I will never use other people's stories for my work, at least not close to me. The problem is that when you're writing about life in general, in fiction, anything, suicide, infidelity, the cauterizing of art, anything, which I do all of those things, you can't possibly not tread on the toes of your loved ones, because we're all human, and these experiences are amongst all of us. So my rule is I won't share any specifics of people's stories and circumstances. And I definitely have been censored before, externally, and that is also not helpful. And I've had to do a lot of work to again really know where I stand on something, and really know who I am as a person, and what do I want, because I'm not living my family members' lives, and yeah, so that's my answer. I fought my own censorship, a little bit of external pressure, and early on in my life, in the music, I had that one experience, which is very emblematic of many people's experiences.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rosemary. I know that sometimes when we're writing, it kind of are processing the trauma that we've experienced in the past. So I guess when it comes to recovering from these traumatic experience, how has art helped you process that trauma? I know if Kendra, if you wanted to share it all first.
I'd have to think. So go ahead, Rosemary.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say about Kendra, not that, it's my place, but when you're writing your poetry about the physical things, that to me, I'm assuming you're definitely working your way through physical things because you're writing about them. So that's my, as from an observer's point of view. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but that certainly feels it when I'm reading.
Yeah, I think even yeah, I'm not even sure if it's all of my health and chronic illness and pain. It's not something that I necessarily have to or want to heal from, but it's something that I definitely want to at least make sense of and kind of understand, and have a tolerable memory of. Maybe I'll kind of try and rid my brain of something that I don't want to remember again, but sometimes I'll rewrite something in my head or through a poem or through like a review or something, where I'm able to work through those emotions and kind of rewrite it even internally, so that I have this ability to revisit it if I need to. Especially for like medical purposes too. You're always having to revisit medical trauma all the time to doctors or nurses. So it's really important to be able to access that without feeling that pain again. But yeah, I don't know if I would consider it like healing per se, just more of like making it tolerable for sure. Revisiting it in a different way.
Erika, you
Sure.
were frozen.
I guess for myself, I don't know if I would. Some of the experiences I wrote were traumatic, and then others I would say are not as traumatic, but it definitely, like, for example, a friend passing away because of them from suicide. For something like that, that is still some, like, me writing about stories like that still helps me process and like helps me, I guess, like the grief that I went through, and kind of gives me a sense of closure, I guess you could say. So there was also an episode I was supposed to do with a friend, and she passed as well. And I kind of dedicated like an episode to her, and that episode kind of helped me process of my friend passing away too. So some is traumatic experiences, but some is just I guess just trying to cope with certain experiences. Yeah. Do you feel the same, Rosemary? I guess your work is, are people passing away?
Well, one thing, this is
Hollow.
sort of I'm kind of stepping outside a little bit of what you asked originally, but
yeah,
one thing that I love about writing fiction, and when I hear voices in my head of the characters, that I can bring back elements of people that I've lost through death. I can hear their voices. I can hear, so, you know, I'm thinking of my British grandparents who were like parents for me. I was really, really close to them. Even though there's no characters in the book that are specifically based on them, in terms of the voices, their voices, or maybe their way, definitely their house I brought back in The Girl on Harlow Street, or at least the atmosphere and the ambience of that house. And so through fiction, it's a way of touching again, of experiencing again what I cannot have in the, you know, off-page world. In terms of trauma, I have been, you know, through a degree of trauma in my life. And for me, you know, art and the creation of it is extremely helpful in overcoming that. So I wanted to say, you know, that art is a creationary process. So if you are going through trauma or you're recovering from it, probably if you're in the recovery process, art is usually something that you can do fairly easily, in that, you know, you don't necessarily have to leave your house. It doesn't require a lot of physical exertion. But how do I want to put this? Just by engaging in art, you are creating, you're building, you're choosing life over death. So, you're building, you're not tearing down, you're creating, you're not destroying, you're engaging, and you're not withdrawing, deeper and deeper into yourself until you implode. The act of creating art, whatever that art is, and it could be something quite simple, it could be a craft, it doesn't necessarily need to be a serial novel or a 1,500-page novel, but in and of itself, you're building and you're creating. And as an adage to that once you start creating, the art itself will probably lead you very gently out into, for me at the moment, into nature. And so it reconnects you with the physical world, it reconnects you with the environment, it pulls you out of yourself, it pulls you out of your head, even though you're kind of in your head when you're writing. And then in doing that, it then starts to reconnect you with people. So that's what's happening to me right now, that it's pulling me, I'm building something, it's pulling me out into, not even pulling, but leading, guiding me out into the environment, into the natural world, and then it's connecting with me with people. And all of that is healing, it's restorative, it's repairing, it's rebuilding. And I think that art has that creationary bent to it. When you're creating art, you're choosing to live, and you are choosing to carry on. So that's what I wanted to say about art being creationary.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rosemary. It's I haven't really thought about art in the ways that we're discussing it tonight, and it really is opening my eyes in how many different ways that art is so healing to us. I think one of our last questions for the night that I wanted to ask is, since the three of us are all creatives, and we're always creating art in some type of form, but do you feel that being creative helps you tackle other problems in your life, and feel that creativity is kind of contagious to problem solve in different ways?
Kendra, again, do you want to go first, or
you go ahead?
Okay. Yeah. So this is something that I get really, really excited about, because I think art, the creation of art, becomes a model for actually how to treat ourselves, but a model to just how to live our lives in general, or at least how to tackle problems in general. So I did actually write this down before the podcast because I wanted to sort my thoughts out on this. But if you look at the creation of art, so let's take someone who's painting, it doesn't need to be painting. You use that crayon analogy, so it could even be a child doing this, or a grown-up using crayons. But you are working with a color or a series of colors, and those colors don't work. You have, a gazillion other colors and color combinations to choose from in your creation. And Kendra, thinking of you, if you're a dancer and there's a dance, a choreography for a dance, and a series of steps aren't working, a series of movements don't feel right, they're not looking right, you can experiment with your body and with steps and movement to create what does work and what does feel good for the dancer and for the audience. And the same I could say for musicians. If a set of chords doesn't work, if a chord doesn't sound right, well then there's an infinite number of sounds, and maybe not infinite, but many, many sounds and chords and arrangements and, triads and things that you can get from the piano. I'm thinking of the piano to create the sound that you want, and it's experimental, and there's just an endless number of options. With writing, which of course is, my art of choice, and words are the tool. If I'm writing and the words, I can't find, that's not the word I want. Well, there's thousands upon thousands of words to choose from. that I can play around with to get this sort of sentence to sound, or this line to sound how I want it to sound. And if I can't find words in my own language, well, then I can respectfully and reverently borrow the odd word from another language that does work. It is an infinite, array of possibilities when it comes to getting that sentence or that sound or that rhythm in the sentence the way I want. And then I'll go as far as to say that if I don't have the word I want in my own language, and I can't find one that I could use in another language, I'm always making words up. And if you read any of my poems, I don't do this too much in the novel, but I am always making words up. There is no rule saying that you don't have, that you can't. And remember, this is a creative process, and you can be creative with your materials. Like, the art itself is creative, but you can also be creative with the materials that you use to create the art. And so I make words up, and that for me is a creative process. I need a word that I need to turn a noun into a verb. I need to, get across a rhythm or a feeling or an image. I need to turn a color, an adjective into a verb. And I know that the reader on the other end is going to know exactly what I'm talking about. And they don't need to go and look that up in a dictionary. And all of a sudden it's this very creative process. But if you think about life, for the most part, and again, just for the most part, we tend to come at problems from a sort of a very linear perspective. And we don't treat problems, we don't come at them with artistic thinking. We don't come at them with creative artistic thinking. But if we did, and I believe that we should, then you have many, many options that you can go to. You don't have to use one color. You don't have to use one move. You don't have to use one word. You can look perhaps at what another cultural or ethnic group is doing that is working really well, and then respectfully and reverently, I don't want to say take, but adopt, and again, respectfully, what that group of people is doing to make it work perhaps for you. And if things aren't working, just like art, start experimenting, start making things up, start coming up with solutions, So I do actually look at problems in life the way I would look a little bit at a sentence that I'm trying to work with. If I can't find what I'm looking for with the standard set of words, I'm going to start to look at different options. I may then turn to Spanish, which is my other language, and slip the odd Spanish word in that people would recognize. And if you think about borrowing from other languages, that's actually really great if you do it sparingly, because your readers in your language in the process are going to learn another word that they didn't know, right? So I guess for me, this how did we say it, for problem solving, that I think that if we come at our problems with the same artistic thinking that we use when we're creating art, that we would just be so much fuller and so much more abundant in our materials and our resources when it comes to tackling other problems, that don't have anything to do with a piece of art we're creating. Because it's like a modus operandi. So if you operate in one field a certain way, chances are that way of thinking, that way of being is going to spill over to the other areas of your life for the better, hopefully, when it comes to artistic and creative thinking.
For sure. I was just thinking of, there's no way everything is as like clean cut as just like sticking with one language or one form of art. You know, everything is interdisciplinary. If you're looking at it for problem solving, or if you're even using different languages in writing in English, there's always a crossover with words that derive from another language, or like there's always some sort of intersection with another form of art, or the same art but in a different mode, like in a different language or in a different key. If you're writing a song, there's always something that you can always borrow, or something that can help you in the way that you wouldn't have access to if you were just going with it with that one straight, clear cut, only this one art form. And I think problem solving is definitely an art form that you get with trial and error and seeing what you can use from different mediums.
Absolutely. And another thing that I'm thinking while you're saying that is that another healing quality of art is that usually the creation of it is multisensory. So if you are very in your head, and if you are, you know, sort of lost in a certain type of thinking, which is unhealthy for you, the act of creating art engages multiple senses. So I was thinking, well, in dance and maybe culinary arts, you can see how it would work with many senses. So I challenged myself to say, well, how does this work with writing? Because writing seems at the outset to be a very solitary, in your head form of art. But if you start to rethink that, think about writing. Well, writing, even if you're not using a pen and paper, you're at your keyboard. It's very tactile, and you are, you know, you're touching those keys all the time. So your hands are always active when you're writing. For me, because I write to music and I also write to sound, depending on where I am in my novel. So if I'm in a Victorian street right now on the internet, you can hear horses, you know, clopping down cobbled streets. And so, or I write to rain. And so for me, then we now have the tactile, but we've also got the auditory nature of writing for me. Then if you think the author is experiencing all of these emotions, and the emotions are going to have a physical effect on the author's body. So the author cries, the author's stomach muscles tighten while they're laughing. I say this with a little bit of a wink, but if they're writing explicit scenes, then, you know, their body's probably reacting in a different way. But it's a very physical, you know, it's a very physical experience once you bring the emotions into it. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, we've got auditory, we've got tactile, we've got the physical reaction of the human body. With smell, I don't use that one too much, but I have been known to have aromatherapy going if I want to elicit a certain smell. So in my novel, bergamot oil is used. And so I looked high and low so that I could find that for the infuser, so that I could have that smell in the room while I was, you know, writing certain scenes. And then there's the sixth sense. And that to me is the most important sense, or one of them in healing, because that is, you know, the spiritual part of healing. And so when you're writing, if you are in the zone and if you're channeling the emotions and you're letting all of that come to you, and you're in this other place, which is almost very out of body while you're in body, then you have that in there as well. So writing, as heady as it may seem at a first glance, is actually engaging multiple senses. And all the time that those senses are being engaged, you are not just lost in your traumatizing or reliving your traumatizing thoughts and lost in that. The multi-sensory nature of writing, it's like all those things are like threads, and they're kind of softly pulling you, pulling you out of those traumatic thoughts that are sort of holding you back. And I say that with experience. So that's not me just, philosophizing on something that I've never gone through myself.
I love that idea of going back to when you said, I'm kind of thinking now, whenever I have a problem, I can kind of look at a crayon box as an analogy and kind of know that there are other solutions there. Like I can use the green color to solve XY problem in my life, or the black if I needed that instead. And then I was also thinking, when you were both chatting about adopting from different cultures, like fusion foods, and like how I went to one recently and I had like a butter chicken poutine, and that in itself is a creation. And I'm sure someone was creatively problem solving trying to, when they created that food. And it's pretty cool to kind of think about it in that way, what you both described. So
well, the English, I was going to say the
differently.
English language is a fusion. It's an amalgamation. And Kendra, you were saying this before. So things that we assume and we just take for granted are not a mix. Well, they are. If you think of, if you've studied English, you will have studied Old English, and then you will have studied Middle English, and you'll realize that there's Latin in there. There's German worked in. In fact, in one of the poems I wrote maybe last week, I used the expression Bonhaus, which is, excuse me, my German is terrible pronunciation, but that's the Old English word for the human body, and it means bone house. And I always loved that, bone house. It's because that's what we are, and it really draws your attention to the scaffolding of the human body. And then just quickly about the crayons. In 2016, I think it was 2016, when I had these 2 surgeries, and I was very, I was just very ill for a long time, and again in bed. And back then I wasn't on social media in the way that I am now. And again, I feel a little sheepish about this, and maybe I shouldn't, but I used crayons all the time. I was cartooning my illness. So I have these journals, and I would cartoon, my visit to the hospital. I'd cartoon myself, coming out of surgery. And then I do that in sort of a fine line black marker. And then I would just go crazy with the crayons, all colors. And it, again, I think that it goes back to this thing. It's just the colors, the frivolity, in air quotes, because it's not frivolity, but all those colors were really distracting to me. It was very tactile to just, use those crayons on a piece of paper. Also, for me, a sense of humor, because I was using humor to cope with. I don't know if anyone else found my cartoons very funny, but I found them funny. And, I would sit and color in some ways in a very childish way, but it certainly helped me through a very dark physical, with physical ailments or physical surgical kind of things.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Rosemary, and thank you as well, Kendra. I really do appreciate both of you sharing all your thoughts, and especially from a creative perspective, and both being writers and just being vulnerable to sharing your own experiences about art and about healing, because I know it's not really easy doing these podcasts and kind of sharing like bits of your life and stuff. To me, even though I've been doing this for almost 2 years now, I get scared every single time. So I really do appreciate both of you being here and chatting with me.
I was a little more nervous this time, to be honest.
You too? Yeah.
Yeah, because last time you were asking me, strictly about the novel. And of course, we're talking about fiction.
Yeah.
And even the things I'm posting on LinkedIn, they're, you know, I'm not going into great detail into my life. And so I was a little bit nervous about coming on here and talking freely, but that's okay. I think it's important that we do talk. And I think it's really important to get the message out that we've all used art as part of our processes, or a part of our coping mechanisms. I also wanted to say that art can be very celebratory. It doesn't necessarily have to come out of pain. I mean, it can come out of glee and celebration and all of these wonderful things. But of course, the nature of this talk is having it to help us, you know, overcome.
Did you feel nervous as well, Kendra?
Oh, of course. But like, I think it is just like you're sharing this bit of yourself with everyone. And it feels vulnerable, but you make it very easy to just chat and like feel like it's a regular chat on Zoom. It might feel a little different in person, but you know, it feels like catching up with friends.
I know.
Definitely.
Yeah. Was there, now that we're ending off the episode, I would love to share any bits of like, of your work. Do you have any links that you want to share, or any, pieces of art that you're currently creating that you would like to share before we end off? I think, Rosemary, would you want to share a bit about your YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. So for me, this main work of mine, The Girl on Harlow Street, is on Patreon. And so that is the subscription-based platform where if you sign up for it, you get an episode a week. If you sign up now, or anytime you sign up, you immediately have access to the whole thing since the beginning of time. But then, of course, you'll be following along, and that's going to be a fairly long run. I think it's going to take another year at least for that to run its course. And so that's on Patreon. And then the things that are free, you know, that aren't, you know, on any subscription-based plan, are on YouTube. I've just started the Mind of the Writer channel, and still really early days. I think at this point I have 18 subscribers. So, you know, I'm just getting started. And that is a combination of graphic videos, not graphic as in explicit, but graphic using images that videographer that I'm working with, Matthew, is putting together for me, and alternating with me chit-chatting in front of the camera. And then, and that's all on the psychology of writing. And then I've, in a way, not intentionally, but it just seems that I am doing these daily video, photo, poetry posts on LinkedIn, and people are telling me that they're fairly therapeutic. This is all a nice surprise. I don't want to say I'm enjoying it, but I am enjoying it. It's just really great. And if you want to follow along, that's another place where you can find me.
Awesome. Thanks, Rosemary. I'll definitely have all of these links in the podcast notes as well, in the podcast description. And Kendra, did you want to share anything, any pieces of work that you have coming up that we can follow or support you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want you to check out The Girl on Harlow, because it's also been a few years of my editing. I think it's been 2 years now.
Yeah.
So please do check it out. And also, I guess if people are interested, I have a website too where I post my most recent writings / performances, so people can find stuff there.
Awesome. Thanks, Kendra. I'll link that too, if that's okay, in the notes as well. Yeah.
And what about you, Erika?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I guess I could share mine too. I guess to listen to the podcast, feel free. We have I interviewed a handful of guests and also have some solo episodes if you feel like listening. I know, Kendra, you recently listened to a couple of them too, so I'm happy you're able to relate. And then for Locals Fest, we've just been doing like reels and TikToks of locals around the area. So if you have whoever is listening, any locals in mind that are awesome, and I would love to share them as well. So yeah, thanks for asking as well. As a host and like doing the podcast, I never think about sharing my own stuff. But awesome. Thank you so much again, Kendra and Rosemary. I had so much fun talking with you both, and we'll see you two again next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.